Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Going to call this meeting to order. This is a workshop of the Gainesville City Commission to get an update on our comprehensive plan update. We're excited to have everyone back with us and see where we are and where we're headed. There's only one item on the agenda, so is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Motion by Commissioner Santos, seconded by Commissioner Sacco. All in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? That motion passes unanimously. And with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Persons, perhaps? All right.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, City Commission. Andrew Persons, Director of the Department of Sustainable Development. I'm going to give a couple of brief words of introduction, and Eric may want to say a few words as well. Then we're going to turn it over to HRNA and as well as some of the staff that have been working on the comprehensive plan, especially on this phase that we're in right now, which is the drafting phase. So I was sort of thinking about some of the words I wanted to say, and what really kind of came to mind was like how this plan is really a plan of firsts for the city. This is the first time that the city collectively has sort of stopped and done a comprehensive analysis of our guiding principles that are contained within the comprehensive plan. We've never done an analysis of how those principles either affect the reduction or in some cases the reinforcement of racial disparities in our community. So that's really significant, and I think it really lies with the Commission's vision of how this plan could be a transformative instrument for really reshaping pretty much everything that the city does, and that really lies with another first, which is the resolution that the Commission passed, embedding and centering this plan around racial equity. We had a meeting earlier this week with the state, with the Department of Economic Opportunity, ahead of our future transmittal of the plan, and so we were talking to them about just some questions, because this plan is not a plan that they see every day, and so we asked a question about can you tell us some information about like some of the other plans that are being done in the state? Are there any other plans that are really sort of in this vein? Are there plans that are really centering advancing racial equity as a guiding focus? And their response was maybe predictably, no, you guys are the first. And they said, from Gainesville, we expect that you guys are going to be leading the state when it comes to thinking about new ideas and pushing the boundaries of planning here in Florida. So that, of course, filled us with pride, and I think again reinforces the theme about this plan being a plan of firsts. So we are the first in the state to do what we're trying to do here with this plan. This is a plan that is also the first time that the city has used community cultivators. This is something that the Commission has talked about, and this plan has been one of the aspects or hallmarks of this plan has been, how can we leverage this process as a process that can help build capacity, both internally inside of the city as well as in the community? So the community cultivators, the fellows that have been part of this plan, are helping drive the community engagement process. We have a number of events coming up where the community members that have been part of the cultivator program are actually going to be out in the community over the next couple of weeks doing engagement work. We'll be there as staff to help support them, but this is largely being driven by the community cultivators. So that's really exciting. Like all good things, it's something that's new. I think tomorrow at your general policy meeting, you'll be hearing some of the experiences of one of those cultivators. But it's really, really exciting. And I can tell you, I've participated in a number of the meetings that Ann Wolf has been holding with them and with the with the folks that are organizing the cultivators, and they're really, really affirming. Like I go to those meetings and I listen to the ideas that they bring forward and their perspective, and I come out of that meeting energized in a way that, you know, as much as I love what we do at the city, like it just has a different energy. So I'm really excited about that as well. This is the first time that as a city we've employed new tools to do engagement and to collect community feedback. We have a interactive platform that we've been experimenting with called Conveo, where we've been posting different materials for direct comments from residents and neighbors, and it'll be the place that we begin to post various drafts of the plan as we move through through this phase of work. So I think that all goes to say that this has been, I think, the process itself has been a transformative process. That I can't think of a time where I've worked on a comprehensive plan where we've touched more parts of the organization and had more different parts of the city staff that had not before ever been engaged with the comprehensive plan. And we've had a lot of really good interaction and discussion about how do we align the plan with other planning efforts that are going on, like the strategic plan. And so I think I'm really, really positive and excited about this next phase of work. And what we want to do today is kind of share some of the big ideas that have emerged from the first phase of work, as well as where we are now, which we're generating a lot of the ideas and strategies that will go into the final draft for moving forward. So with that, I'll let Eric say anything he wants to say, and then we can turn it over to the presentation.
All right, thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of the commission. I would just say, in echoing what Andrew said very briefly, that I think the last time we went through the comprehensive plan update, when I was sitting in Andrew's seat there, it was a more formulaic exercise, and I feel like this go around has been a deeper experience in terms of things like aligning the comprehensive plan with other things that are going on in the city, or strategic plan, other planning efforts, which is important. I think I've been impressed by the civic engagement that we've had, because I've seen people showing up at listening sessions that normally we haven't encountered in the past, and I think that's been a very positive. It's widening the net of engagement, which I think is great. And I think importantly for the city, it's amongst the staff internally, it's building ownership into the comprehensive plan. So importantly, as we move forward with the comprehensive plan, it's the city's comprehensive plan. It's not just the planning and development areas comprehensive plan. It's a comprehensive plan for the entire city. And then lastly, I just would say it's very aspirational in terms of furthering the principles of racial equity. And I think working with HRA, they're the right consultant for the time. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So Ms. Gabby, Ms. Furusawa, I don't know who's on deck, but we are so glad to see you back. Hope you've been well and excited to hear this update.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Commission, yet again for bringing us back on the line to talk about the comprehensive plan effort. We're really excited to share what content we'll get into today. We do have a presentation, and please don't be alarmed by the wrist braces. I have a minor wrist issue I'm dealing with. I promise it looks worse than it actually is. So okay. With all of that, I'll launch into the presentation. Okay. Thanks, Ari. So a little bit about what we're going to be doing with the conversation this afternoon. I'll talk a little bit about where we are in the process and the work that is happening now, where we're going to go. We want to spend the majority of our time today, as Andrew sort of talked about, going through these bold ideas. And just, you know, the bold ideas, it doesn't represent the full scope of everything that's in the plan. We sort of want to focus on some of the sort of bigger shifts that require some more discussion and teasing out with all of you on the line. So we'll be talking through that. We have folks on the line from across the city organization who are going to be presenting on the different ideas that they have been working on from the staff side. So we'll be sort of opening up for Q&A and commentary on some of those concepts, and then we'll close with sort of next steps and where do we go from here. So starting first with where we are in the process, as sort of Andrew mentioned, right now we're in the drafting phase. You know, the pen is on the paper. We've spent the last sort of series of months collecting some of those big ideas. We're continuing to collect public comment via both our sort of survey that we have live on the sort of website, as Andrew described, as well as some direct comments on some other materials that we've posted for the public to review. So we're continuing to collect that public input, and in parallel, also, you know, holding additional events and outreach via the Community Cultivators Program. But while all that's happening, the staff and HRNA are working together to draft the draft chapter text. So actually writing some of the content that will be in each of these chapters. And what that includes is some revised outcomes, you know, the goals, what we're trying to achieve, the strategies, you know, the different tactics and methods that we can use to achieve those outcomes, and then indicators. How are we defining success and setting ourselves up to be able to track our progress? So the draft chapter text, that's really what's included there, along with sort of our ongoing discussions about how can we create accountability in ways so we can sort of ensure that this plan moves forward. We want to make sure that we're intentional and deliberate, and that this plan does not become like great language that sits on a shelf. You know, how can we set ourselves up for success so that this is ready to be implemented? And the last sort of phase that we'll be going into, you know, toward the end of June into July, after we have a draft and post that for more, you know, comment, collect some more input, it'll be about refining. So spending that last sort of month or so refining the chapter text and thinking about, you know, how does this go back to the state, you know, making sure that we're crossing our T's, dotting our I's, making sure that the plan is, you know, performing the required functions and fulfilling our, you know, ambitions for what this plan can be. Is the best plan that we can draft. So that's a little bit about where we are in the process. And I think before we get into the bold ideas, one of the things we wanted to share with all of you is a quick outline of what this plan, how it's starting to be organized. And just briefly to talk through, we'll start with an introduction. You know, what is a comprehensive plan? Why does this document matter? What power does it hold as a, you know, a statutory document, et cetera. We'll start with an introduction, then we'll move into a summary of Gainesville today. You know, this is sort of a quick overview of our community, how, you know, we have gotten to the place we are today, especially around the topic of racial equity. What is the inequity that we see today? How can we put that into numbers and sort of really frame up this argument that by centering those experiences of, you know, different types of marginalized residents across the city and thinking about how we can resolve those urgent issues, you know, we are going to make a better Gainesville for everyone. So sort of talking a little bit about where we are today and where we want to go. After that is the heart of the comprehensive plan. We're calling it here a plan for all of Gainesville. This is where those chapters that we're talking about will fit in, where it really contains the strategies for, you know, across the city organization, across the sort of geographic map of the city, you know, what are the different strategies that can help to achieve our ambitions. After that, we'll have a section on implementation and accountability, you know, who's responsible for moving any of these things forward, some commentary on, you know, how exactly that would happen and what we can hold ourselves to, any strategies that we can employ from a leadership perspective, from a management perspective, from the staff's perspective, and from the general public's perspective. How can we be accountable to this plan to make sure that it's moving forward and moving forward in the best way? And then in addition to all of those, like that's the meat of the comprehensive plan, there will be a series of technical appendices that are, in many cases required by the state, sort of providing additional information and guidance for folks, let's say if they need to comply with certain types of standards, et cetera. That's where we would house a lot of that more technical information. And that's one of the key ways that we're making sure that the document itself is more approachable for, if someone wanted to pick this up and understand just generally what the city is working on, how those priorities shake out. We can, make the top 4 sections a little bit more approachable by taking some of those technical pieces and shifting them to the back. So that's a quick overview of the outline for this document. And Ari, if you go to the next slide, here, just to remind ourselves again of what these 8 chapters are. As I said, a plan for all of Gainesville, that section of the document is going to include the strategies across all of these different areas, where we live, which talks about housing and housing access, how we move, more about transportation and mobility, how we work, sort of employment, jobs, business across the city, how we play, sort of about arts, culture, preservation, how we learn, which is about public education, how we live, health and well-being, our environment, which covers a range of topics, including energy and energy efficiency, water, air, conservation, natural resource management, et cetera. And this last chapter is our democracy, which kind of talks about city government and administration of city government and partnerships and relationships to other government and government agencies. So we've been sort of working within these chapters with the staff across the organization and GRU and others to sort of put together the series of concepts that we'll be showing today. And as we mentioned earlier, what the plan for this conversation is for each of these 8 chapters, we've highlighted a few bold ideas. And you can think of these as some of the signature concepts that, let's say we put together a quick executive summary of the plan. These are some of the items that, the staff have nominated to go into that summary. If you're saying these are some of the biggest, most transformative things that are inside this document, these are some of the ideas that staff have nominated to sort of play that role. And so we'll go chapter by chapter, and the staff will present and talk through, what the idea actually is that they say is a bold, transformative move for the city of Gainesville, how that sort of relates to or addresses sort of racial disparity and economic shared prosperity in the city. And after that, we're going to pause after each chapter to have some question and answer open discussion. And while we go through that discussion, what I'll ask for you all as the mayor and the city commission to keep in mind are a couple of key questions. So first, what could be improved about these concepts? How could they be made stronger, more ready to be implemented? How could they allow for clear yes or no decisions? And that point about yes or no decisions relates to something we've talked about, I think, with all of you before, that a major issue with the current plan is that it's very easy for someone to take their project and say, well, I think it aligns with this area because it's kind of fuzzy, and I'm just going to make that connection and check the box, and we're good to go. I followed the comprehensive plan. We want to make sure that we're clear with what we're trying to accomplish and as strong enough in the language to say, this allows for yes or no decisions. So keep that in mind as we sort of listen to the bold ideas. How can we improve the concepts? There are a couple of other things to keep in mind. Where do you see these ideas connecting with racial equity issues? Could this be, addressed more directly? Do you think, or do you believe that this will result in real change for, people living across the city? Could this be even bolder or more specific around who it's targeting? What's going to help this actually touch people's lives? And I want to acknowledge that there's a lot of additional ideas, other work that hasn't come into this deck. This is just the bold ideas. So that, is something that we want to keep in mind. This isn't representative of absolutely everything, but is there something else that you think rises to the level of a bold idea? What do you want to say if we're building together this idea of some of the signature transformative strategies the city can take, and we can reflect on that? So, roughly 4 different questions around how do we strengthen these ideas to make them as bold as possible, make them really connected to some of the issues we're trying to address. And with that, I'll ask for us to move to the next slide and turn to our first discussion, which is about where we live and housing access. Thank you. I'll turn it over to Lawrence.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of the Commission. Good afternoon. This is Lawrence Calderon with Department of Sustainable Development. Mr. Mayor, I know that the Commission is committed to housing. I've worked with the city for 30 years and I'm convinced about that. But housing is a beast. And I think of it as a giant octopus with tentacles that extend to the strangest places. And I refer to these tentacles as housing occupants, housing sites, land use, financial institutions, the university that generates a lot of housing, and on and on and on we go. And I do not want to leave out the appraisers, because how property is appraised has a big influence on housing supply. We believe that we have a good grasp of the subject, and this afternoon we want to present you with some bold ideas. First, we call them bold ideas because we want you to empower yourselves. We want you to empower the community. We want you to empower staff, and we want you to be bold about the use of your resources that are available to you. Well, the worst that can happen is that we will be back to where we are, which is better than where we are today. So I want to talk about two bold ideas. One would be establishing housing programs through community initiatives and establishing direct program implementation through staff and the community. So the bold idea we have would be community driven. We want to focus the program and the implementation strategies from a community perspective. We want it to be something that's generated from the community. We want it to be something that's reflective of what the community needs and what the community wants. Gainesville is not a single universal area. It's a multicultural, diverse area. And as such, we are looking at those geographical areas so we can ask the communities to focus on those areas. With community involvement, we can target specific areas. And with the use of your resources, as we prioritize those areas, you can channel infrastructure, transportation, land use, and all those resources you have to the correct place, meeting the correct need of the consumer. Recommended tailoring land use and zoning is one of the items that we have discovered that embedded within our land use and zoning, we have a lot of areas where we can address to cut costs and make housing more affordable. Another area we talked about was educating and training the community. We see that those would result in racial disparities addressed as we implement those programs. For example, Gainesville suffers from a severe cost of housing. It goes from land, material, financing, and many of the added costs that we do not see. Residential development is not affordable in Gainesville. We do not have control. The control is the market, and we want you and us and the staff to be in control. Creating the second bold idea is to create housing coordination through staff. What we were thinking is that have staff, the departments, be more involved in the implementation of the comp plan, especially the housing, and bringing all the related aspects that we have discussed into the implementation programs as we launch them. We want you to have a strong resolution committing to funding the comprehensive plan, because without that funding, we are just dead in the water right where we start. And we're looking to make sure that you have that commitment to fund and finance the comprehensive plan. Your resources, we think we can bring a number of agencies and groups from outside, bring them together to work with staff and to mobilize their expertise and efforts in a manner that would foster and further our comprehensive plan. And as such, we believe that some of those two bold ideas, along with the number of others we have, will forward the comprehensive plan, especially the housing, to a far greater point than we even can imagine. Thank you very much. and I'd be happy to answer questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Calderon. Commissioner Santos?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you. Both great ideas. On the first one, in cities that try to put affordable housing into places, usually the community around there says no, and says it's not a place for it, and things like that. And that's happened across our country. How do you kind of see that, or how does that address? How do you see kind of addressing that where when affordable housing is proposed or changes are proposed, that overcoming that pushback, or I guess educating that pushback? Or is that what this would be, is kind of helping to overcome that?
And Lawrence, I welcome your perspective. I'll also be jumping in a little bit on some of the questions that we get on different chapters. One of the ways that I think about this is that the first step is to have this be community driven and to allow for a community driven conversation about what they want to see. And you'll see that in the latter sort of part of the sentence, it's important to define the levels of affordability. Because when you're talking about affordable housing, it actually means a lot of different kinds of things. And I think one of the ways that public discourse gets stuck is by talking about affordable housing, but people in their minds are conceptualizing a lot of the fears and issues that happen from, their version of what they think that means. But it actually can mean many different things. And so, while Lawrence talked about community programs that would help to build a community understanding of the different affordable housing options and trade-offs, bullet number 3 here, there's a piece of this conversation that starts with the community that helps to build an understanding of what actually are we talking about when we say affordable housing, and we say what are the different options and what are some of the different trade-offs of them. And with some of that grounding in mind, that's where you can have a more fertile discussion around, well, if we acknowledge that our community is having a difficult time finding affordable places to live, what are the things that we can do? And it'll be really, I won't, skirt around the fact that these are really difficult conversations to have. It's a really easy place for people to shut down and say, because of what I have in my mind around how I define affordability, I want to say no across the board. But I believe that based on a process that could be designed for each of these different areas, every community is different, every community-driven process needs to be different. There is a way to sort of talk about the level of affordability that's needed so that people can live good lives and have good access to jobs. So it's something that we're thinking about and want to be intentional about. And I think it starts with defining what are we actually trying to accomplish and what resources can we bring to bear.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I like where this is headed, and maybe what I'm about to offer fits within number 1 here, but maybe it doesn't. Maybe it needs to be its own thing. I'm interested in the idea of how we as a community and as neighbors invest in each other in existing traditional neighborhoods and with existing homeowners. And we've got a couple of pilots with the heirs property assistance coming around, and with the idea of I forget what we ended up calling the program, but giving grants to people to move into neighborhoods or to buy in neighborhoods where they currently live or used to live. I'd really like to see us focus on how we strengthen neighborhoods instead of saying neighborhoods are gone, let's figure out where we're going to put affordable housing. So I'd like us to call that out very specifically if y'all are interested. I mean, I'm not, if it's just my idea, it's okay to say, Harvey, that's a bad idea. But I'm interested in how we can help each other invest in those neighborhoods that need the help and support people who already live there. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, I think you can keep going.
All right, thank you. This next part will be about transportation and how we move, and I'd like to pass the mic over to Debbie or Juan.
I think Debbie was having some trouble connecting, so.
All right, well, good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. For the record, Juan Castillo, Planner for the Department of Sustainable Development. So as we probably know, transportation is very important. It helps our neighbors to get from home to work and to wherever they need to go. Transportation in Gainesville can take many forms. And as you well know, we are pushing to diversify our transportation options. That includes the private automobile, that includes buses, mass transit, bike trails, and even includes creating a more urban environment where people feel more apt to walking, right? So with that in mind, one of the bold ideas for our comp plan is to make sure that transportation and mobility is available for everyone in Gainesville at the same level of service, like for everyone. And one of the issues that we have encountered is the fact that that unfortunately, at this moment, that's simply not the case. There are certain parts of Gainesville where it's easier to move around, and there are more transportation options with higher levels of services. And there are other parts of Gainesville that are simply not at those same levels. And so part of the reasons if you will, for the disparity in the availability of these services to our neighbors. Part of those reasons, unfortunately, comes down to funding, of course, but also a lack of the availability of services. And so I know that we are currently working on providing some of those services in underserved areas, such as an increase in the infrastructures of bike trails, the availability of in-demand services for transportation, public transportation. And one of the ideas that has been tossed around also is the implementation of fair food programs dependent or subject to different levels of income. But we want to make sure that the comprehensive plan identify these services and these strategies and supports them and ramps them forward. We want to make sure that this is intensified so that at the end of the day, we can look at Gainesville as a place where anybody, no matter where they live, has the ability to go wherever they want to go, whether it be across town or whether it be to the grocery store, whether it be to work, and they can do so efficiently. We know also that from feedback from our town hall meetings, people have identified a lack of services primarily centered around the east part of Gainesville. And so we want to make sure that the comprehensive plan addresses that. That includes access to increased service of transportation, access to safe transportation. So one of the comments from the town hall was the fact that bus service, for example, is not as frequent on the east side of town as it is in the downtown area, for example. And of course, we know that the issue there, one of the issues is funding, of course. Bus routes are expensive. There's no way around that. And if you want to increase those services, it needs to be paid for. Downtown areas have the benefit of primarily servicing the student population. Therefore, they have that agreement with UF, where UF has has a direct funding to those transportation that serve their students, but the east side of town just does not have that. That's just one example, but identifying these situations would help us to somehow mitigate that, again, by providing or by finding funding sources to help increase levels of services in the east side of town by providing services or continue to provide services such as the in-demand services of transportation, and by continuing to expand the infrastructure for things like bike, and creating more urban environments so that people feel more comfortable walking to wherever they need to go. So I think that is what I wanted to say. Harry, if there's anything that you want to add, please feel free. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Castillo. Do you have a few lights on here? Start with Commissioner Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, let me say amen, amen, and amen. I love this. My only concern is that the document we're creating is not today's document or history's document. It's a document moving forward. We know that we have pockets of poverty and of lack of access throughout the city. And we can predict that some of those pockets are going to move and expand over the next decade. So I'm a little concerned concern is not the right word. We should single out East Gainesville. But how do we then address pockets that we can already see developing in neighborhoods like Phoenix that are entirely isolated? And places where I would bet you we're going to have more lower income residents with accessibility concerns, transportation accessibility concerns, farther out, 20th Avenue, 24th Avenue, as we grow as a city and encompass, again, I would predict we will, in the not too distant future, encompass the Swag neighborhood. And I don't want us to only focus on East Gainesville, because the number of people in Southwest Gainesville who need the help 10 years from now may be equal to the number of people who need it today in East Gainesville. Just a thought about it. We need to make sure that we're nimble enough to address poverty where it exists 3, 4, 5, 10 years from now, as well as where it exists today. Just some thoughts for future thinking as we go through this. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Tucker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you all. This is, I think I'll agree with Commissioner Ward here, one of the topics that we like to tackle because they can produce wonderful results if done right. My question on the mobility services in East Gainesville, is that based on, I guess, lack of frequency of mobility options, just general lack of mobility options, not enough mass to support the mobility options? Where, I guess, does the origin come from? Because I think understanding the origin of it, like, this is a purely single-family neighborhood. It doesn't have the mass to support building a line out that way. If that is the origin, I'll agree with Commissioner Ward. We need to understand that that's the origin and look for other neighborhoods that have that same, I guess, mapping and conditions to predict where it'll happen again. So is there an origin to the issue?
So, I'll kind of backtrack just a little bit to emphasize that yes, our idea is to provide same level of services for transportation for everyone in Gainesville. And so when we identify pockets of or an area where that level of service is somehow lacking, the idea is that we would focus on those areas to bring it up to a level of service that's acceptable and standard across for us. So as far as the origin of lack of mobility in the east side of Gainesville. We've heard from our neighbors and at the town hall and other situations with public participation that some of the things that they have identified has been things like a lack of frequency for buses. So, for example, there's like, I forget the route. I believe it's not 45, but there's, for example, a route that would take anywhere between 45 minutes to an hour for in frequency, and a neighbor misses that bus, that neighbor has to wait another hour before the other bus comes around. In other parts of Gainesville, that's not the case. Buses come 15, 20, 25 minutes. And so it's easier for someone to move around in a certain part of Gainesville, much easier for them than it is for someone to move around in an area that doesn't have the same level of service for bus. Another thing that has been something that has been identified has been, for example, the lack of options for buses, which we are currently working on in providing things like transit on demand. But for some parts of Gainesville, there's only one bus route or two bus routes, where in other parts of Gainesville, there's 5 or 6 that you can easily maneuver, whether you have to take 2 buses to get to your destination, or maybe you can catch 1 bus and get there just as well. So these are things that we've heard from my neighbors. I believe that's Debbie on the line, so I can give her some space to chime in.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I apologize. I was having some technical difficulties, but I was going to add that I think what this idea envisions is a future in which all neighbors have equal access to a variety of transportation services and infrastructure that would be safe and convenient and serve individual needs. So we're attempting to prioritize people versus cars, kind of shifting the way we approach things. So not focusing in a particular geographic area, as Commissioner Ward referred to, but more extending it to all neighbors, and so everybody has equal access. And in terms of transit provision or lack of services in East Gainesville, I think it's both a function of the lack of densities in that part of town, and also a function of the presence of the university that invests heavily in the student-oriented routes. So we're trying to modify and reinvent how we provide those services, looking at more on-demand type of service that is more flexible and convenient to meet individual needs. And we have been experimenting with that on the east side with 3 zones. The service has been fairly successful, and it was implemented with a grant from SDOT. So we're looking into how to potentially extend that service to other areas. So I hope that answers the question.
It does, thank you. And just, I think it's where my brain is going. So where we see the infrequency, is it further away from business areas or retail areas? Do we see more of those frequent stops, or that frequency along corridors that have retail or services, and the infrequent ones more towards residential areas? Is that how it's breaking down?
I don't know exactly, but I can bring some information back.
Okay, yeah, no, because that's my thinking of where you live matters, and if you live next to, let's say, like 13th, you are more likely to have more bus routes, or a greater option of them, even if not just frequency, than if you live closer to the outskirts of the city, where necessarily folks aren't traveling to with that high frequency. And I don't want our formula.
But I was going to say that where you have a stronghold of student population, you're going to see a lot more frequency of service. For example, in the southwest, by south of Archer Road, for example, in that area by Butler Plaza, southwest 20th Avenue, that have a high density of student-oriented apartment complexes and multifamily dwellings. So I think it's more of a function of that versus business,
Okay.
this
Um,
business-oriented districts.
Okay, all that to say, I don't want our formula to look kind of at that density necessarily because it's proved to be less than successful. I'd like to see it be more, and I think you guys are on this route anyway I think you guys are on the route to look at how to capture all the neighborhoods, at least with some regular frequency, rather than on a formula based on density or services around that would have frequency. And I think that would be I prefer that approach personally to make sure that everyone has some baseline equal opportunity to have access to it. But thank you for the info.
Thank you.
Commissioner Santos?
Thank you, Mayor. Two things. I think on the third one on closing the gaps in bike and pedestrian infrastructure, you mentioned expanding more too, but I mean, I think we need to do more than just close the gaps. I think we struggle there mightily. I think one of the things we should have in the comp plan is building a multimodal greenway trail system that connects every neighborhood, and that's one way to connect it, get people off of the roads and having separated trails that are safer. And it's just a long-term plan. I guess other thing on level of service of transit, I think we should have a better minimum level of transit level of service, but if someone lives in a house out on the very edge of our city, they probably shouldn't have the exact same level of service as someone who's living downtown, because they're relying on not having a car if they're downtown or in areas that are very dense. And there's thousands and thousands of people there. So I think we need to find a minimum, but also I don't want to like have a level of service suffer for people who are relying and using on the bus, and now they can't rely and use on the bus because we may have cut services. So I think we need to find a balance of not everyone having the same level of service, because I don't think we can do that financially. There are some areas that should have 10-minute service, 5-minute service, other areas that have 30-minute service. I don't think we should have any routes that go over 30 minutes. But I think if we start running 10-minute service to areas that have very few people, just losing money nonstop. So I think we have to look at ways, but some areas of the city should have better service just because of where they're living. They're not relying on cars, and they are relying solely on the bus. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I feel like this element needs some work still. So just to start off with, and I think this dovetails with what Commissioner Santos just said, this document's supposed to be based in equity. And so when we say ensures neighbors have equal levels of public transit service, that's not equity. That's equality. And those are two very different things, and we've established that already. So we can achieve that goal, as it's written there, by reducing service in areas that have high ridership and transferring that to areas that have low ridership. Now everybody has the same sort of frequencies and headways, but that's not accomplishing our goals. And I don't have all the answers today, but we need to continue working on this. And really, when I think about equity in transportation, it's making sure that every neighbor is able to move around our city safely and efficiently, regardless of mode of transportation. So the solutions for somebody living out at Turkey Creek Forest are going to be different than the solutions for somebody living on Southwest 20th, are going to be different than somebody living in Lincoln Estates. Those are three very geographically different parts of our city whose neighbors have very different mobility needs. That's what we need to get to the core of in this plan. To say that everyone should have the same level of service, that's like saying that the Gainesville Airport and the Atlanta Airport should have the same level of service. They shouldn't, because they're fundamentally different. Yeah, Alan, I'm gonna get a call from Alan Penske, I know. But they shouldn't. We're different communities servicing different needs when it comes to air travel, right? We're not a regional hub. We're, so I agree that it's appropriate in our comp plan to have some minimum level of service. I think when we really get to, when we talk about bold, big ideas and creative solutions, the solutions for parts of East Gainesville, parts of Southwest Gainesville are going to be different than solutions for the urban core. And I think part of our sort of regional mobility hub idea that we're piloting right now out east is a really good first pass at figuring that out, where we can pick people up in front of their house, get them delivered to a high frequency connector route that then gets them to their job, to their doctor, to their school, wherever they're trying to go. But I think we're missing the target by a pretty wide margin when we say equal levels of public transit, because that's not equity. That's achieving a different goal, but not the goal I think we have embedded in this plan. I'll leave it there. I think it needs work. I'm happy to help do the work. There's a lot of great examples of transportation equity initiatives around the country and actually around the world. We don't have to this is a horrible pun. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. But I feel like we've got a lot more work to do on this one. With that, I think we can go to the next topic.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. I'll hand it over to Eric.
Mr. Mayor and members of the commission, are you hearing me okay?
Yes.
Great. Well, this particular bold idea is going to be is being proposed for the How We Work chapter, and it's first and foremost an exercise in alignment, because the City Commission has already placed a pretty heavy emphasis on getting into the job training and career development space within your strategic plan. Actually, staff was discussing that just a little bit earlier today. And I think there are many things that are already going on regarding this particular emphasis on job training and career development. And I'm thinking about things like the repositioning of the Job Corps that the City Commission has already directed us on, the Bidwell Center, the apprenticeship program for construction apprenticeships. There's a partnership that's being put together at Lofton High School on a multi-generational approach to job training between Santa Fe College, the school board, and likely there'll be some participation from the city. The Career Source is now a department of the county. So all these things are going on currently, and this is really trying to build on many of those things and ensuring that we are participating with our partners in establishing and expanding job training programs that focus on residents of color, and also ensuring that those programs are taking place in places where people can access them readily. We're also thinking about potentially some kind of some type of contribution to try to have involvement or spur involvement in training opportunities. Now, having said that, that could take the form of, partners figuring out a way to provide some type of funding. It could be an in-kind type of thing that we've just discussed. The mayor was pointing out in terms of, getting people to different places and how do you do that. but we really want to struggle and work on these issues of residents of color being underrepresented in high-paying jobs, and then residents in East Gainesville having difficulty accessing programs. I do want to mention one example that the city took on about a year ago, and that is that we did before there was such a heavy emphasis on all the universe of things that are going on now in the space, that was that we tried to institute a job fair program at Spring Hill Baptist Church, working with Reverend Taylor. And the idea there was that we wanted to set that program up in a space that was accessible, but then also we tried to pair up mentors with particular individuals that would take part in the job training. So we're thinking about models such as that. And then again, partnering with some of our community partners on this front as well. So I think that this is just one area of the How We Work chapter that's focused more on talent development, but we're also going to be covering business development, and then this issue of building capacity and ensuring that folks, particular businesses of color have, let's say, things like access to capital, et cetera. So these are some of the ideas that we're working on here. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I feel like this one needs some work too. I'm trying to be positive. I thank you for all the great work. I appreciate all the input that you gathered and where you are. This is an area where I think the city really needs to be cautious about getting too far outside our lane. We're a relatively small organization within a larger county. So, you know, are we going to restrict anything we do to city residents or not? That becomes hard if we say we are. Hard to sort of differentiate who we help and who we don't. Second of all, and this is where I think there's a great opportunity here, and also, you know, I think we need to be careful not to get in the way. New leadership at Santa Fe is 100% committed to using that institution's resources to further equity in our community. Dr. Brody has been very clear that that is his #1 priority, and really reimagining, rethinking how Santa Fe engages out in the community and especially helps folks match the skills that the market is in demand for with what Santa Fe delivers. And, you know, obviously the investment they're making, you know, downtown here is a big part of that. But I know that they want to do a lot more in this space. And so I think about, like, what can the city do short of like creating a job training department or whatever, you know, like something that we don't do at all right now and don't really know how to do. So to me, it's really about where we spend our money. Like, where does the city spend its money? That gets to the procurement process, that gets to the apprenticeship ordinance that we just passed, making sure that when the city spends money, it is spending in a way that promotes and encourages local businesses that are creating jobs and are creating jobs in areas where there's high demand and where there's living wage pay. And so I feel like we've started down that path considerably, and we should really keep building on that. I agree with, like, you know, we need to get out into the neighborhoods to, you know, meet people where they live. We're going to get more participation that way. I think there's a lot of question marks out there with the county and career source. I mean, I just don't, is it going to be the same model? I mean, they've taken on a big, big task there when the county took that in. And so, you know, I think figuring out how the city fits into that, you know, but I think sometimes we forget that we have this amazing community partner in Santa Fe College whose primary mission it is to, you know, serve and develop our local neighbors and get them the job skills they need to be successful. And they've historically done a good job of that. I just think they're really looking to elevate that to the next level with the new leadership out there. So I want to keep thinking about this, but I'll tell my colleagues up here, I think I'm going to be more focused on how we spend our money and resources to put that money in the hands of neighbors in our community to give them chances they otherwise might not have. And I think that's more aligned with our mission and our resources. With that, I'll go to Commissioner Santos.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Agree with you, and definitely on the county taking over Career Source, I think could have it'll be interesting to see what they do and how they change that. That's millions and millions of dollars of job training funding, and how they allocate it, and how do we partner and elevate that, and look to see where the gaps are from kind of these large partners who are moving. And I don't know if we need to be the one in front on that, because these are the ones who have millions and millions of dollars already set aside for it. How do we look to fill the gaps? Thank you, Mayor.
Commissioner Saka?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll agree with you as well. I do think that, I think the most direct thing we can do is best apply our finances to those neighbors and neighbors' businesses who otherwise might not have the same opportunity. And so I am completely for focusing on local hiring, making sure that we scour the city of Gainesville for talent before we widen the net any further. When we contract out services, that it be local businesses who are hiring locally, who will pay the minimum wage. And if that's a reimagining of procurement, I think, or finance, then I think we should look at that and how we give priority or preference to minority and women-owned businesses, how we give priority to businesses that already pay a living wage, to businesses that are local and or at least regional and not from South Florida or from Jacksonville or out of state. I think that's where how we best and most directly impact the employment of our neighbors who are a minority, to make sure that those dollars go to them as opposed to I guess the more roundabout way of trying to train them into a position for a job that might exist at the city, if that makes sense. I think the more direct way is to contract those companies already and make sure that they are vetted as companies who meet these goals for us, if that makes sense. But if we are doing trainings, if we are doing engagement, I definitely agree that it should be outside of the downtown area. I don't know if that means partnering with entities that already have buildings and connections to the communities outside of downtown, or if we happen to have other buildings of a certain size outside of downtown. But I do like meeting people where they are instead of requiring them to take a 15 to an hour commute by bus or bike or walking to get to wherever we're offering training and engagement. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner Duffy-Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just last week, I had the wonderful opportunity to go and tour with Tony Cunningham, Water and Wastewater. And it was amazing. I shared with Tony very candidly that I had no idea I was going to enjoy it as much. One of the things that was most impressive was that immediately when I hit the door, I was greeted by two employees who were relatively young, who had been there for roughly 15, 20 years. Right off the bat, I said, something is going on right here. One of the conversations that we entered into was a job training program that they had at one point already had in place. And so this gets me thinking that perhaps we don't really need to look outside. Maybe our efforts are focused more inward, and the job training and opportunities that we provide that focus on residents of color, or that really start to focus on gaining this equity that we're looking to gain, are really looking at our departments within the city. And so programs that actually encourage our citizens and our neighbors to come work for the city because it's a great place to work. I think that our departments are yearning for those opportunities. We talked about things like STEM the other day, creating these programs. Some of them have already been in place. They need an infusion of resources. Some of them have had to stop the programs that they were doing because of a lack of funds. So I would like to entertain the idea of looking inward at what we already have in place, building those out, and really establishing a wonderful relationship with our neighbors that says, hey, we are the city of Gainesville. We're here for you, and this is a great place to work. When I think about it, people come here, and one of the reasons that they stayed so long at water and wastewater was because of the environment. I asked them. It was a family-like environment. It was a great place to work. They give their time freely because they enjoy doing the work. That excited me. So I think if we turn that idea, that energy into something, look inward at what's already in place, that we might be able to accomplish this without having to worry about what the county or Santa Fe is doing. The city of Gainesville can actually create its own job training programs that bring our neighbors into our city structure and give them opportunities to build good lives off of what we offer here.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And I'll just give you one example, Commissioner. A couple of years ago, I was out at our fleet maintenance facility, and I was talking to the fleet director, and said, "What are your challenges? What are your problems?" He said, "I can't hire mechanics. I can't find them. We need mechanics. You know, it's a good-paying job, benefits, working for the city, right? You got a retirement plan. You got great health care. Can't find them. Can't hire them." So I went and talked to Tom Mason out of Santa Fe, who's part of the auto mechanics program out there. I said, "Tom, can't we?" I got everyone together, right? I got everyone in the room and said, "Can't we develop a program where students start there, then they come to the city, do their internship and training, on-the-job training, and then we take the best and the brightest and we hire them straight from their internship into the city." And Tom just kind of chuckled at me. He said, "Lauren, I've had that conversation half a dozen times over the years with different mayors and different city leaders. There's something preventing that flow." And it's not, that's just one example, right? We've got these needs all over the city, as does Alachua County and UF. I mean, so there's somehow a gap, a barrier between all of the great stuff that's happening at that sort of entry level, the young person learning the basic skills, and then ending up as a wastewater technician or an apprentice at GRU in the electric side, to fully realize that. And so I think what you're saying is very doable, right? Like, we can figure out what those gaps are. What are our needs as a city? We can dovetail this with some of our other large institutions, and try to put resources towards closing those gaps so we give more people those opportunities. Because there's no reason that should exist, right? There's no reason the city should have trouble hiring mechanics, or wastewater technicians, or any of the other folks that we can give a really good career to. So hopefully that's helpful, y'all. I think I'm not shooting down any of these ideas. Like, I like the idea of paying residents to participate in trainings. Like, if that's the incentive that gets them to the training and sort of gets them through the door and engaged, and then we can kind of follow up with them and be very intentional with how we bring them along the process, that's great. If it helps make a difference, I'm all for it. I'm all for, not just for employment and job trainings, but anything. The more we host sort of out in the neighborhood versus down here, great. But again, I think there's still some work we need to do to focus on where our city resources and dollars can do the most good, and then how those align with our other community partners and what their strategic priorities are as well. And with that, we'll go to the next item.
Thank you, sort of Mayor and everyone. And we'll go to the next item. I just wanted to sort of bring in one sort of comment or observation around this area of how we work across the country, really. And just to add a little bit more into the conversation, I really appreciate all the comments. I think we're sort of circling around a lot of really important issues. And just to remind us all that this How We Work chapter is a new addition to the comprehensive plan. It doesn't currently exist in the current plan. There was never a requirement to have city sort of participation in the systems of workforce development connecting people to jobs. And so in this iteration of the comprehensive plan, we're sort of bringing that in. And, you know, that also reflects what we're seeing as a need in the community and a gap that has to be filled. If we're truly going to say our public dollars and resources are connecting people to, you know, quality jobs and quality of life. And I think some of the things that we're sort of discussing right here are reflecting something that I see across the country where cities are grappling with what is the best role to play in this thing, because you're never going to be the best, you know, job training provider. Let's say, you know, the university has so many different things, or Santa Fe College, they have so many different things that equip and prepare them to actually deliver those services. And I think what we can do here is to try and articulate, well, what is the role that the city is prepared to play in terms of how it uses public dollars with the, you know, public employment opportunities, the way people are employed at the city. And for some of these external partners, what can the city do, just as you were saying, Mayor, to address some of those gaps? And think about, you know, well, maybe Santa Fe College is, you know, doing a lot of work thinking about their programs, but if we were to share some information with them about where the community needs are and where those lines of connectivity between people and jobs and careers are broken. If we can be an informative partner to these people who are delivering the services, maybe that's a role to play because the city has that information. There's a lot of, you know, decisions to be made and questions that remain around how exactly that works. But just wanted to give you all a little bit of comfort to say this is an active live conversation across the country about how do you invest in people, and, you know, recognizing that investing in people pays back dividends. And so what can we do with public dollars within your wheelhouse to not necessarily lead on every area, but to support and think about how it fits into what you all can control. So just wanted to add a little bit of context because, you know, there's a lot of uncertainty around, in particular, employment and the city's role in employment. And it's something that we're all discussing. And if you all have further comments on this or any of them, very happy to take those. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Ari and our next slide.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful, Ms. Gabby. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So take us over to our next chapter about how we play arts, culture, and preservation, and hand the mic over to Russell.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. I'm Russ Etling. I'm the Cultural Affairs Manager with the Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Affairs Department. And I want to reiterate what was said earlier, is that we have a number of ideas that are supporting the outcomes that we've identified in our chapter. But in developing strategies that support a couple of the outcomes, namely that all Gainesville residents would be able to enjoy the arts as part of their daily lives, and that all Gainesville residents would have a sense of belonging at our city's cultural programs, we evolved one bold idea that could cultivate our youth from an early age to have an appreciation of the arts and culture, and also be inspired by seeing role models that they could relate to. The 352 Arts Jam program would be the first step in establishing an art education program in our Cultural Affairs Division, something we don't have now. Coordinated by a new on-staff arts educator, the 352 Arts Jam would be a multi-day, multi-day movable workshop program that would focus on youth and communities of color and take place in neighborhood and recreation centers. The jams would explore a broad range of multidisciplinary art fields through participatory art experiences and educational opportunities, and they would be enhanced by guest subject matter experts who would be artists from diverse backgrounds. The program would seek to address representation of neighbors of color at our cultural events by cultivating new audiences. It would provide more cultural opportunities for our young neighbors, as well as creating opportunities for artists of color to be more engaged in our city arts programming. That, in short, is one program of many we've been working on.
Thank you, Russell. And I'll skip over to our next slide and pass it over to Jason, and then we'll take questions on the two ideas. So Jason, whenever you're ready.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, this is Jason Simmons with the Department of Sustainable Development, talking about the preservation big idea that we're working with. The idea is to redefine how the city evaluates assets of historic and cultural value with gaining input from community members and organizations that represent the city's diverse communities. And that would be a guide that the Historic Preservation Board would use to evaluate these various assets. Instead of just looking at criteria for designating something historic, such as age or architectural features or building style or building integrity, who the architect was, etc., the city would also evaluate assets of historic and cultural value using other criteria, maybe non-traditional criteria that may not be as prevalent. An example is looking at the social history of a building, its historic significance within the neighborhood, within the community that it serves, and also looking at long operating businesses and institutions. We've seen here and in other places that the community can feel a great loss when an important neighborhood historic place is demolished. It can result in a kind of cultural displacement. Sometimes the people feel powerless because they couldn't gain the same type of recognition of that building as maybe some other type of building that had more traditional building and architectural features. There's a need for more inclusive designation criteria that can be used to possibly help communities of color designate their important buildings. These criteria can include intangible heritage and social values to give communities the opportunity to preserve a more diverse range of assets that may not necessarily meet the stringent integrity requirements that you typically have when determining architectural significance. One of the ways this can help communities of color is that sometimes they may be able to leverage historic preservation as a tool to exercise some control over redevelopment, and have their voices and concerns considered through the preservation process. One of the racial disparities that has been identified is the fact that neighbors and communities of color are not well represented in historic preservation discussions at the present time. So that's the big idea concerning preservation, and I guess I'll turn it back over to Ari.
Thank you very much, Jason. We'll take questions on both Russell and Jason's idea.
All right, thank you both. Commissioner, is that you? Okay, go ahead. My glasses on.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I have questions of comments on both. I like the idea of the 352 Arts Jam program, but I'm interested in how we, instead of a program, I'm interested in how we use this opportunity to build into the comp plan opportunities for everyone to play, everyone to have access to arts and culture. Not just one, you know, this is a good program. I just don't know how it works in the comp plan. And I'm very interested in making sure that we include ways to perpetuate opportunity citywide for arts and culture. Russell, you mentioned that there are lots of other programs, and you don't need to list them all. I just want to make it real clear that that's what I'm looking for is a way to codify and perpetuate opportunity for arts and culture in this plan. Not with a program or two, but with things that really build into the bedrock those opportunities. As far as historic preservation, it's been occurring to me over the last few weeks, especially, that over the next few years, we're going to lose a lot of people and with them a lot of stories. You know, over the course of this comp plan, the next 10 years, a lot of people who have a lot of our city's institutional memory over the last, 75, 100 years are not going to be with us anymore. So maybe this is an opportunity for us to think about historic preservation as a way of keeping those stories alive and documenting them not only on recordings in a library or something, but displayed for us in the city, and so that our children's children will have access to Vivian Filer's wealth of understanding of our community. And I just name her as just the first person that came to mind. But dozens of other people who lived through some seismic changes in our community. And I don't want them to be lost and their stories to be lost with them. So I think there are definitely opportunities to build that kind of thing into this document. I don't know how, but I want us to be cognizant of that going forward. That the people who we're going to lose over the next, I hope I'm wrong. I hope all those people are still with us 10 years from now. But I don't want to lose stories. I want that history to continue to exist. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Santos?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And I think it's a very big point. Buildings are buildings, but people are actually what makes a city. And I think that's a great point, something that I feel lacking in this city of trying to figure out even like stuff that happens at the committee, like what the governments, what happened in the past year. And so I think there are a lot of holes we have in figuring out what was kind of our history, and there's no better place to start than now. So I definitely very much, I think it's a great idea. On the 352 Arts Jam, I love that program. I also, think how do we expand it, make sure that everyone in our city has access to different things, and I think there's different levels of where it is in the city. If it's out in the middle of nowhere, it's gonna have a different thing than if it's in downtown or core places in terms of like the intensity of it. Historic preservation, I like the idea of looking at other intangible things, because I think that's where we should go towards looking at historic, like what do we preserve in terms of buildings, of looking at an individual building and what was the cultural significance of it? What was the historical kind of story behind it? What did this building kind of do, versus kind of looking at wide swaths of areas? I think that is where you can, that building can then help tell that story instead of just the whole city's story. I don't know. I worry about that. I think so. I think looking and figuring out what buildings really do help preserve our city, I think is very important. Because just because of a place is old, it doesn't mean it's, I think, needs to be preserved. There are areas that have to redevelop, but let's find those areas, those buildings that hold that true history. Wasn't really just here, but I think another important thing for me is our access to our parks and where people play there too, of making sure that there's a park within a 10-minute walk. It's something that we've talked about, but I don't think it's actually in our comp plan. And then kind of tying the last three items together, play, work, live, is I really think that we should, in our comp plan, say that we want to have complete neighborhoods where people can walk to a grocery store, or walk to for food, or walk to whatever sort of retail, grocery, whatever convenience, whatever it might be, and being able to have jobs that are in walkable or bikeable distance. I think trying to tie these all together with a kind of a complete neighborhood, I think is important for me as well. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner Sacco.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I love these ideas that have been presented. So I'm going to deviate for a second. One of my favorite things that the Cade Museum does is that it'll hold little STEM hands-on nights or afternoons where you could, it's like $20 depending on the material cost, and like you will build something out of a light bulb, or we will teach you the science of X, Y, and Z. And I really see the 352 Arts Jam kind of emulating that, where we will have the supplies, we will have the instruction, just bring yourself, and you can immerse yourself in this art or culture session. And I would love to see that just expanded even more across all media of the arts and throughout our neighborhoods, because whether by finance or distance or even the medium might be difficult depending on the age or your ability. Having a variety of those available, and I would love throughout the year, just not even, it says multi-day. I'd like to see it available bi-monthly, to know that it's somewhere in our calendar, built into our city's culture, that, you know, every 2 weeks there will be some kind of art event that you can sign up for and participate throughout the city. And you can that way explore the neighborhoods, get to know different neighbors, get to know different areas of the city, while also engaging in art and culture. And I think that fulfills that mission at so many different levels. I think as to the preservation, I do like the idea of preserving more than just buildings. I don't know who the keeper of that knowledge or the preservation would be, but I know that when I first moved here, and even when I was running for this office, it is very difficult to find information and history in one set place. If you want to know about something, you're gonna have to track it down to a lovely octogenarian who saw it all and can tell you what it was. But there are very few centers that will have a variety of information on the history of our city and what we've gone through. And I don't know if then the city becomes the keeper of that information, if we dedicate some resources to tracking that down and keeping it somewhere, whether through audio, whether through writings, but just to have, whether through, I know Commissioner Ward's complained about this one before, photos of what we looked like 15 years ago, because we changed things and then no one actually remembers what South Main looks like, or what University used to look like 50 years ago. And I think showing, having an archive somewhere of the growth and growing pains of our city would be a good thing to have for the preservation of those stories. As to the existing issue, I think we in the past have been reluctant to, not always, but sometimes been reluctant to say we don't like any of these applicants, send it back out again, and keep a board position open and open and open until a more appropriate candidate comes forward for things like the preservation board. And I don't know if that's a reworking of how we do advertisements, if that's a reworking of how we do the descriptions for the applicants, or if we ourselves have to be conscious of this is not what we expect for this board, and we have to just keep moving it on, continuing it until we find a better candidate. And the last point, what was it? No, I think that's it now. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Duffenberger.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a few points I'd like to make with this. First of all, thank you for everyone who contributed to this portion of the presentation. I believe that preservation should be completely separate. I think it deserves an item or a section all of its own, because preservation is actually a big thing. With my family having lived and owned businesses in a historic Black area here, preservation is something that is of real importance to me. Just recently, I can draw upon this experience. So over in the Pleasant Street district, that is one of the areas of town that is rapidly changing, that hopefully this comprehensive plan will be able to help us get a handle on. There is a church, a historic Black church. There are actually two on the same street. One is mine, but the other is Friendship Baptist Church. And we were at that church relatively recently, and we've noticed how the community has evolved. There are now some houses that are directly across the street on a parcel of land that was once used to park. And so as our communities evolve, the longstanding and existing institutions that have been there for years, like this church has been there for over 100 years, now finds itself in a position where it can hardly practice the rituals and the religious ceremonies that it's used to doing. That becomes a source of great concern for me. And so when we think about preservation, absolutely coming up with standards and criteria that are inclusive of Black spaces is very, very important, but also this idea of being mindful of how spaces are preserved in various communities also is of great concern. I can also tell you that to that same point, at my church, it's a very similar situation right down the street. A historic Black church that was founded by former slaves is experiencing a very similar thing. People have called the tow truck, literally, on people who are used to parking in front of the church. So as our communities evolve, this idea of preservation becomes very, very important. And I'm hoping that we can dig even deeper in that redefining how the city evaluates our assets to include those things. I'm grateful that this is a part of the discussion. I certainly hope that we'll take an even deeper dive on that. To Commissioner Ward's point about losing stories, I'm with you 100%. I have a 95-year-old grandfather who I still have the luxury of sitting at his feet and hearing those stories, and you're right, preserving them is very, very important. Commissioner Psycho, you mentioned the same thing. So I believe it would be a wonderful idea if the city could in some way create an archive. Now I'll say this, I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program out at UF. That is a renowned repository, but I believe that the citizens, our neighbors, deserve access and also kind of their own space where their stories can be housed. The University of Florida is doing a wonderful job with what they do, but it's a different idea. You know, the idea of accessibility, the idea of ownership, and that is both perceived and real. Those would be two things we would have to deal with if we decided that we were in fact going to embark upon this idea of some sort of city or community archive. I would love it if we would explore that. The community has already expressed a desire to. When I was at the Aquin Jones Museum, that was one of the projects that we started talking about and actually working on. A lot of different, little underpinnings there, but I believe that being the keeper in some way of the history becomes very important in terms of maintaining the story, making it accessible to our citizens, who honestly should have their own space. Everything shouldn't have to be at the University of Florida. The citizens should be able to access their stuff somewhere else. Final point, I believe, historic preservation is actually a tool of equitable development, and that excites me. So this idea that historic preservation is something that we will now take a look at in the plan is wonderful. I'm hoping that we will take a look at some of the equitable development standards that exist. It's a new space-making idea, so there's a lot of room and flexibility to do kind of whatever you want, but it definitely ties right into equitable development, and it's a way that we need to consider how our communities evolve from this point. I believe, oh no, I did want to speak to the arts and culture piece. So thank you, Russell, for the work that you've done on this. I would like to add that if we're going to put something like this in the comprehensive plan, the neighbors of color who are adults are not represented as well. I'm looking down at your first bullet point under existing racial disparities. And so I will always be a proponent of making sure that our children are addressed, but if it's going to be in the plan, I believe that we need to kind of focus on a more kind of comprehensive look at addressing all members of the community that is not always equitably represented or well represented in our arts and cultural events. So I would like to see you kind of flesh that out just a little bit to include a broader spectrum of age. I believe that's it.
All right, thank you, everybody. So I think a lot of points that I had going through have been made, but I think one of the most important things to get us where we need to be versus where we are right now is, and I think it's represented in that first bullet, that a lot of times our arts and cultural offerings are not as culturally relevant to our neighbors as they can be. And so really being intentional about having culturally relevant performances, activities, shows, and that's low-hanging fruit, right? I mean, we're not reinventing the wheel there. It's just about finding the right sort of fit for what the community wants and needs and sort of can see in itself. And sort of connected to that, part of this, I think, is not about us doing a bunch of stuff ourselves, and again, this is not a departure completely from where we are now, but we've got all these great cultural organizations in our city that are chomping at the bit to get out there and do their thing, and really what they need is space and a little bit of support, and so to me, that's probably an FTE that helps coordinate all these groups and all the public space that we have to get to, kind of Commissioner Saka's goal, which actually could, I think we could probably say weekly, where there's just constantly somebody from the neighborhood performing or providing an activity or a show in the neighborhood, and we're merely the coordinators and the providers of the public space. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here. I mean, I do feel like this one is much more close. Let me try to speak English. Much closer to where it eventually needs to be. Like I have a lot more confidence with where we are in this one, and I think it needs a little more fine tuning, but is pretty much there. You just need to put the punctuation marks in the right spot, and all that. So with that, we'll go ahead and go to our next plank in the platform.
Well, thank you all. I'll move us along, and our next chapter is how we learn in public education, and I'll hand it over to Bides to talk us through.
And just before we start, this is a new one as well, right? This is not in our existing plan.
That's correct. And this is also a chapter that is not required by the statute, but we've made the decision to include it given the importance of public education, including the potential collaboration and partnerships with school board and the county.
Yeah, right. Because I know some people watching out there, wait a minute, did the school board do that? So yeah, this is new, and that's
Mr. Mayor, if I could just add, we do have a public schools facilities element that's already in the comprehensive plan today. It largely just replicates your current interlocal agreement with the school board, which is fairly, what's the right word for this? Fairly programmatic, meaning it's like it sort of lays out some rules of how the two jurisdictions like will interact, and like provide sort of opportunities for comment, you know, on different actions. It doesn't really get into like any of the like, what are we trying to solve together? And I think that's where we're trying to take, even though we do have an element right now that covers public education, we think it could be really enhanced and moved into a much more, I think, tangible and impactful direction.
Great, thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the commission. This is Bedez Massey, and I'd also like to introduce Nathaniel Chan. The two of us have been assigned to the How We Learn Public Education chapter of the comprehensive plan. And the focus of this chapter is educational equity. Our big idea is to create an Office of Education for the city of Gainesville. And the idea was inspired by a number of things, but mostly the fact that within the city's organization, there is no department or there is no position that is designed to target public education. We all know the importance of public education and the many benefits that it can provide to our community. You know, everything from reducing crime rates to increasing tax revenues to improving public health. And I can go on and on and on with this many benefits. And in addition to that, there is a need throughout the country to ensure that public education is not just physically accessible, but that we are all given access to education on equal terms. Henceforth, the idea of educational equity. Now, the concept of an Office of Education is nothing new because there are many cities throughout the country that have offices of education. And we are looking at how those offices are structured. So what is presented here is an office that would be headed by someone that has expertise in education, both academically and professional, and that would oversee a department that has perhaps three primary functions. It would coordinate, it would communicate, and it would collaborate. It would coordinate by acting as a clearinghouse of educational resources, some at cost, perhaps some at no cost. And examples of those resources would be, for example, college scholarships, study guides for certifications in different professions. As a communicator, this office would act to bring together educational entities in the community that have interest in and support children, families, and other educational stakeholders, and act as the entity that brings those groups together in order to promote educational opportunities for them. I can think of like the United Way. I can also think of this office serving to bring in college recruiters so that people of all ages would have an opportunity to come in and meet with someone representing an educational institution from the United States and even abroad. This office could also function as a collaborator by working with other stakeholders within the state and within the county to develop a citywide educational strategy to ensure educational equity within Gainesville. The mayor said something important earlier in these discussions, and that was we need to figure out a way to stay within our lane. And I have heard that sentiment in at least one of the town meetings that we've had for the development of the comprehensive plan update. It would be a benefit in developing the remaining portions of this chapter to know whether or not when the city speaks of public education, is it speaking of public education that is funded by tax dollars, or is it speaking of education in general for all of its residents, whether they are seeking public education or private education? So with that, I'd like to conclude our presentation on this chapter. And if Nate has anything he'd like to contribute, I will yield to him. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Fidesz. I think you did a great job presenting this. The only thing that I would like to add is that we do have a staff liaison in the department that works with the School Planning Advisory Committee. However, the big idea here is that with this Office of Education, it would create a dedicated team with staff, maybe FTEs, to strengthen coordination that isn't as strong as it could be between local stakeholders in the city. And from a racial equity perspective, we know that education is everything, especially when considering that where you live will determine which school you go to. And according to our recent discussions, our public schools on the west side of Gainesville are over-enrolled and the schools on the east side are under-enrolled. So we also need to consider the intersection of transportation and making sure our neighbors and their children have access getting to and from school. But other than that, thanks, Fidesz, for taking the head on this.
Okay, thanks. Turn it over to Commissioner Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I recognize that the city of Gainesville absolutely has a part to play in education. I like the idea of a neighbor's education center. I want us to be mindful of the words that we use. There are a whole lot of people who live in our city who are not U.S. citizens and are part of our community. So let's just be mindful of the words that we use. I also want to be mindful of staying in our lane, because very little frustrates me more than when other government entities get in our lane. I want to make sure that we don't get in the school board's lane. I like the idea of coordinating some things, particularly because we're an education community, and it often is entirely useful for somebody to stand in the gap that exists between the University of Florida and Santa Fe College and the Alachua County schools and the private schools and the jobs in our community. And maybe that's a city. Maybe that is our lane right there. I completely get the part that transportation plays in all this, and that is absolutely our lane. No pun intended. But I really want us to be careful that we don't go telling the school board how to do their business, because I don't want them telling us how to do our business. So we should tread in this area, but we should be careful how we tread in this area. Thanks.
Commissioner Saka?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I like the direction of I guess, the purpose to collaborate, communicate, and coordinate. I like the idea of being a clearinghouse of information because it might, I think I'm just going to end up that we should be a library for everybody with all the resources ever so they can ask us where things are. And it's happened. I'm sure we've all gotten emails that say, hi, I'm X, how do I do Y? You're like, that's not really my job, but I'll let you know how to get there or where the resource is. So I wouldn't mind having a point person in the city whose job it is to be aware and to make those connections and to communicate it out through whatever sources or media we have, and to be knowledgeable and kind of just be aware and connected in all matters related to education, be they elementary or grade elementary or post-grade school. I do, however, get nervous whenever anyone brings up creating an office or a department. That is where I start to hesitate. I've said it before, when when we proposed a whole nother department, and I wasn't a huge fan then either. Because part of it is staying in our lane. So I understand that we have a liaison now. I'm not sure if they are full-time, if they are part-time, or if the job is just the work of 2 people. But I hesitate at the point of creating another office that would have to be managed and filled to do something that is not entirely our responsibility. But if it is someone to be aware of the information and the resources available and then pass that on to our neighbors, I'm fully in support of that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. So where I'm seeing this is there are definitely some areas where the city can and should support the educational mission of, I'm thinking primarily our K through 12 public school system. Although there are other users who are still our neighbors and deserve to have their needs met as well, whether it's folks at private charter schools or homeschooled, or post K through 12. The 2 areas though that I think where we can really bake into the comp plan and really specifically address these, and I do feel like it's our lane and our wheelhouse, is in the area of broadband, making sure that every neighbor has access to high quality, low cost broadband. And the second is what we do in that after and out of school time. We have been building and evaluating and working on this for several years now. And I say that in a really positive way. It's led to some great outcomes from the creation of Boost to a better understanding of how we can integrate with the Children's Trust. I think Billy, I know you're on the Zoom because I saw your name earlier, but that's something I think that we can more deliberately embed in the comp plan, that we are going to focus our resources in that after and out of school time to help fulfill positive education outcomes, especially with neighbors of color and in low income communities. So I mean, that maybe we think of that in the parks, recreation, culture, and preservation element, but it probably needs to be really named clearly here that that's the expectation of how we use those city resources. So those would be my 2 points of input. And I think that's it. So we'll go back to y'all.
Wonderful, thank you all. So our next chapter is how we live, health, and well-being. And I'll hand the mic over to Steve and then Billy, and then we'll come back for question and comment. Steve, whenever you're ready.
Yes. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the commission. I'm Stephen Hessen with Gainesville Fire Rescue, Assistant Chief. We know people typically call 911 when they are facing a problem that they have some type of, requires some type of service or assistance solving. They don't have the resources, knowledge, or the current circumstances don't allow them to solve the problem on their own, so they reach out for help by calling 911. We receive the call, process the call, and send resources utilizing a system with limited options and resources that often do not meet the neighbor's immediate need and don't adequately resolve the problem for them. We do really well when it's a true emergency that fits into a confined box and everything goes well and the outcome is exactly what we predict. However, when it does not, we are unsuccessful solving the problem, which results in poor outcome, consequences, and lower quality of life for our neighbors, and sometimes results in additional calls. The bold idea is to create a system that includes the ability to triage calls quickly, ability to leverage more resources that better match the need of the individual neighbor. This would often not include emergency response from fire or police, so it's not limited to just a police officer, a fire truck, an ambulance, it would include additional resource, mental health professional, medical experts, social workers, and the like. This idea is closely associated with something you all are familiar with, which is the Community Resource Paramedic Program. But in my vision, it takes it a few steps further, and it's a complementary effort. One of the defining differences, the CRP relies on a neighbor to have used the system either repeatedly or before, and have someone's identified that it's not a good match for the emergency response system, and they refer it to the CRP program. This idea would approach it in a different way and allow the at the first entry into the system for them to be more closely matched with a resource that meets their needs, even if it's the first time they've reached out for assistance. Thank you very much.
Okay, this is awesome. I love it. Go dog go. My one question is, do you envision this being built out through the existing Combined Communications Center, or would this be something separate?
I would say it would be to be determined. It would have to. I think that would be a higher level of decision than where I'm currently at. I think it could go either way. Yeah. As long as the structure is appropriate.
Yeah, and I'm imagining if the Alachua County Sheriff and Alachua County Fire Rescue is interested in moving in this direction as well, that would simplify the answer to that question considerably. If they're not interested in they want to maintain status quo and we want to move in this direction, it might still be able to be done. It just makes it a little more complicated. But hey, this to me should be a high priority. The future of healthcare, the future of policing, the future of distributing community services appropriately, all depends on this front end triage. So I absolutely love this. I love that we're embedding this in the comp plan. I think this has got so much upside potential, and I know that y'all are the ones that are going to be able to execute it if we move in this direction. So obviously I'm almost giddy with the prospect of where this could head. Commissioner A. Santos?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I was just hoping that we could get this added to the backup, because what's here is different than what's in the backup, just so we have that for the future.
Yeah. Thank you.
This big idea is missing. So.
Yeah, well, we'll get that updated. Thanks. Okay, then we'll go to the next item.
Mr. Mayor.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't want to move past this slide without, I think, highlighting. Well, first, I guess, thanking Chief Hesson for being a really great participant and GFR in the work that we're doing with the comprehensive plan. And I did want to highlight that this is another first. Both this chapter is a first for our comprehensive planning here in Gainesville, and then having active participants from GFR and helping formulate this work is super, super exciting for us too. So just wanted to get that in there before we move on.
Yeah, congregation said, amen. All right, next chapter, please.
Thank you, Andrew. So we're still on health and well-being, and I'll hand it over to Billy to talk us through the second idea for this chapter.
Thank you. Billy Marketel, Recreation Manager for Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Affairs. I'll kind of frame this. In a previous life, I was a facilitator, so I kind of like to frame setups and use metaphors when I can. So when I think about the comp plan, each chapter has its own outcomes, and each outcome is its own dish. You have strategies to basically help make sure this dish is successful. You want your outcome to taste like what you say it's going to taste like and be what it's going to be. So when our friends with the HRNA asked us to come up with some big, bold ideas that could either act as strategies or ways to support those strategies for those outcomes, these are a lot of these ideas we came up with. So for our outcome, or one of the outcomes in this chapter, if you think of it as a dish, is all residents will have a voice in the design of recreation plans in their communities. So along with that theme, what is a good ingredient that would say like, okay, we want this outcome to taste like it's supposed to taste, and not just taste like it's supposed to taste, but taste good. What is a good ingredient to set that up? And the ingredient for this, or the idea, is establishing a community program proposal day, which could be a process to solicit ideas for recreational program or partnerships to utilize available parks and facilities. Doesn't seem like a huge, big, bold idea on the surface, but when you consider how a lot of municipal parks and recreation or recreation departments select their programming, they look what their needs are, they look what their availabilities and resources are, and what they want to do for that year, what they've traditionally done for that year. But a lot of times we don't always take the time to reach out to the community. We do needs assessments, we do different research or studies. We don't always take the time out of the day to say, what programs do you want to have? Or those people that want to provide programs, what do you want to provide? I'll be candid, a lot of our partnerships and service providers we have, they come to us by way of either leadership saying, hey, I spoke to this group or this organization. They had a great idea. We think we can have a good partnership in this park or in this recreation center or this facility. You should work with them. So a lot of these programs get put in place because these organizations or individuals have access to resources. They have access to networking. They know how the process works. They know how to reach out to people. So the idea of having an opportunity to reach out to the community and say, we want to have a day where you come to us and tell us how you want to partner with us, what you want to run in our cities, in our spaces or our parks, gives that opportunity for those organizations to reach out and say, we want to do this. We think this is good for the community for X, Y, and Z. Another part of that would be creating a rubric so that it can be done equitably. So everyone has a fair chance at being heard, and they're not being evaluated on this organization has X amount of dollars coming in a year. They have these resources available to them, but it's more of the idea of saying, this is what we want to do. These are the needs in the community. These are the needs in the department and the city, and grading those on that rubric. So everyone they're being evaluated on what they want to do and not necessarily what they have available to them or who they know. So that's kind of the idea of basically giving an opportunity for different organizations to reach out to us and get an opportunity to use our spaces. Because we do get a lot of organizations or people come up and say, hey, I've got a great idea for this program. And I think it'll have these outcomes and these effects. But if we don't have space in our recreation centers or parks to host them, we have to turn them away. If they're asking for resources we can't provide, we have to turn them away. If someone has gotten to us before that group has gotten to us, we have to turn them away. So this is an opportunity to kind of take that, who's in the know of the process, who knows who, and have an opportunity each year for people to have a fair shot at saying, we would like to partner with your organization. We'd like to partner with the city, and we'd like to utilize some of these public spaces, provide valuable opportunities and programs to the community. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Ward?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of things I want to touch on, but I love this this slide. This is terrific because access to city resources for organizations really are about, I don't want to say who you know because that's not fair. It's not a class-based sort of thing. But you kind of have to know the secret handshake of the organization to be able to request the use of the building. And it shouldn't be that way. It should be easy for organizations, for groups of people to just get together and instead of wondering, gosh, how do we use a recreation center, for there to be a way that's really obvious to plug into that. Because it's not really obvious now. There are people who understand and know how to use city resources, specifically this sort of resources, and there are a whole lot more people that don't. They see a rec center or something and they know there must be a way to use that for their group, but they can't quite figure out what that way is. So making that equitable and open is, I think, a thing that would make people feel a whole lot better about being a part of our city. So kudos on that. I'm excited about that. Specific to healthcare, a slide ago, a light bulb that went on over my head when you were talking about that was, and a thing that is traditional for comp plans, is concurrency for education, for schools. You can't, it's very common in a comp plan to say, you're gonna have to build whatever you build in some kind of proximity to educational resources, and some kind of proximity to transportation and that sort of thing. But we don't require developers to develop in proximity to healthcare. Or for that matter, parks. And we talked earlier, we mentioned briefly the idea of the 10-minute access to parks. There's no reason we can't include in our comp plan that if you're gonna build something, you're either gonna have to build it very near an existing healthcare center, existing medical resources, or you're going to have to pay into a fund that will help develop those resources to become near you. I imagine that is probably uncommon. I imagine it's probably not in a lot of comp plans or required in a lot of places, but there's no reason that we couldn't do that. And yes, it is a stumbling block to development, but it keeps us from being in a situation where people live a half an hour from the doctor. So that's something I'd like to see us test out and see if it's possible to include, because it's the sort of thing, a lot of the stuff we're talking about, it's kind of hard to see how it shoehorns into a comp plan. That's something we can absolutely put into a comp plan. Thank you.
Commissioner Suckin?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Commissioner Ward, I love that idea. You know, there are folks who are just, their business is not medical, fine, but they can pay into a system that then lets us cover that where it's not being developed. So I very much love that idea. And it doesn't have to be astronomical. It can be a modest amount, but I think it gets that ball rolling and it sends a message of you can avoid this if you would just put in what the community actually needs, or yeah, you can put it in another store for shoes. I love that idea. What I was going to say is I do love this redoing of the system. I think the word you were looking for earlier was bureaucracy, when people don't know the bureaucracy of it. And it's very much, you know, do you have the right form? It hasn't been stamped before this form was stamped, and you didn't take it to the right office, and that's not the signature you need. And I think that's how a lot of people view government, so they just give up. And those who have the resources or the time or the experience are able to do it because they have that point person who's done it for 10 years, so they're good to go. And a smaller group that's recently gathered together because they realize there's a lot of the minority in the community and they want to start something new, or in reaction to other issues in the community or nationwide want to gather and be able to use space and express themselves. They just might not have that institutional knowledge or training. So I love this just smashing it all down and starting over from scratch idea. And I think sometimes that is what we have to do. And I think in parks and recreational facilities might be the I guess the least traumatizing place to start that, of just scrapping the whole system and building a new one. So I'm excited that you guys came up with this. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Billy. You know, what I'd say is just what I was getting at earlier with the cultural element. It's this with that. You know, basically empowering people to have access to the space and navigate that easily for cultural opportunities, not just recreational. So if you just put a little dash, provide recreational and cultural programs that are sort of neighborhood grown, that would be transformational within like 1 calendar year. Again, that's the low-hanging fruit. Like, we can really see a massive difference almost immediately if we can just figure that little piece of the puzzle out. So love it. Thank you so much for the work on it. All right, next chapter.
Right, thank you. We have 2 more chapters and about 5 more ideas. So move us along. Our next chapter is our environment, energy, water, air, and conservation. And I'll hand it over to Liliana or Michael.
Thank you, Ari. This is Liliana Kalori, Environmental Coordinator. I'm going to try to keep this one short and sweet. Our environment section of this plan is covering a lot of different areas, from energy, utilities, and stormwater infrastructure to natural resources and urban forestry. But with this bold idea we're bringing to you today, we'd like to focus specifically on how we adapt as a city to climate change, as climate change will have negative effects that touch on all of the subject areas. We know, and the data and research have shown, that lower income communities and communities of color are more likely to experience negative effects of climate change, including impacts to health, housing, food access, and environmental impacts. We also know from past work on environmental programs and regulations in the city that there is a lack of representation of lower income communities and communities of color in these discussions. So the idea is to create a set of criteria or a framework that guides climate action investment in the city that accounts for risk and vulnerability data and equity considerations, to basically ensure that those most at risk or most in need are accounted for in programs and policies that we develop, and they don't just get left behind. This is going to require collecting and updating data on hazard risk projections and other environmental data, and identifying and correcting data gaps where they exist. As well as we also have to develop processes within the city to ensure that the relevant data and equity, environmental justice, and socioeconomic considerations are what drive decision-making related to climate action investment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Santos.
Thank you, Mayor. Kind of the second one of how we developing a process. I think we should have a process in the decisions that we make on like what are we doing? Is this either making climate change worse or better? I mean, I think land use is one of those where land use is zoning, and I think actually one of the criteria when something comes before us is what are the effects on climate change from this land use change? Is it increasing it or not? And I think that can tie to other things too, that I think when we make land use and zoning changes and having that kind of cement in the comp plan, like what are the effects it's gonna, like, if we have more density, they're probably going to be allowed to have more transit and things like that. So what are the other effects of these land use changes on the services we want to provide? Is it cheaper to have this kind of land use for the city and more? So I think that's kind of one of the things I'd like for us to look at too, of having kind of more criteria and when those decisions come before us on land use and zoning. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Commissioner Ward.
Mr. Mayor, I would like us to consider some level of, I'm trying to find the right set of words here. Something that requires that if you're going to do more than a lot or two, you're going to develop more than a lot or two, particularly if it's greenfield development, you're going to have to do some serious mitigation. When we do a greenfield development, which we all know there's not a lot left to do within the city limits of that, other than the enormous project we talked about 2 days ago, you are having a massive climate impact. And there needs to be a discussion about how we mitigate that going forward. If nothing else, it creates a stormwater issue. And I believe that it creates a much bigger issue than that, but we need to build into this comp plan the risk and the mitigation of that risk. I also would like to see us build into this comp plan, include the resolution we already passed for 100% renewable by 2045, and some other milestones for the city of Gainesville's carbon emissions, not only on general government, but also GRU. We have more climate impact as a city than anybody else other than Jacksonville in North Florida. Tallahassee, I guess. Because we have a utility. and we must address that in our comprehensive plan, I believe. I know that I'm terrifying Ed Wlodarski when I say that, but we have to address it. It has to be in our guiding document. And I'm not sure exactly how we do that, but it needs to, we can't do this and pretend that that doesn't exist. So that's something I would like to see built in here. Thank you.
Thank you. Back to Commissioner Santos.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I think looking at the mitigation, but sometimes doing a greenfield site inside the city limits will, I mean, people are moving here. And is it better to have that there, or it's going to have endless sprawl that goes on too? So I think it is, you have to look at that kind of picture. How close is it to different things, and how far people have to drive and all of that, and compare it to if it's somewhere else. Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah, I think the number 2 there, develop process to require that decisions are informed by criteria and updated by data, gets to the heart of that. That now you're making an informed decision and can set policy around it. There's no longer anybody there. Awesome, thank you. Let's go to the next chapter.
Thank you.
Democracy.
So our next chapter is our democracy, and I'll hand it over to Andrew.
Woo! I got the bureaucracy chapter to work on. Actually, I've been working on this with Laura Gretz from Strategic Initiatives, and we've been having some really great conversations. So the first idea, bold idea, is actually not that new of an idea. It's actually something that the city had something similar in place many years ago, and that's the neighborhood planning program. I think as we've sort of talked about this, the city oftentimes does like some really great ideas, things that we've done in the past, and then for a variety of reasons, budget, staff turnover, or what have you, those ideas sort of fizzle out. But the ideas oftentimes have a lot of great merit, and oftentimes just need to be brought back, maybe with a little bit of a different emphasis. One of the ideas that's come out of our government chapter is thinking about neighborhood planning or planning on a smaller scale, and doing a planning that's really kind of community driven. One of the best parts, I would say, about the past neighborhood planning program that the city did was really kind of having a chance for staff in neighborhoods to really work together on developing an action plan for identifying what are the community or what are the neighborhood priorities at a small scale, identifying where the gaps are in terms of the actual neighborhood residents, and where their sort of struggles are as a smaller unit of the city, and then connecting that really great planning work, like small scale planning work, with resources through the grant program. I think one of maybe the issues with the way that the program had been designed in the past was that it really sort of focuses, as the mayor alluded to earlier, on equality, meaning that every neighborhood in Gainesville was open to applying for this and potentially being awarded a grant. But we know that some neighborhoods really didn't need the money. They were just like, oh yeah, we definitely would like to spruce up our landscaping in the front of our subdivision, or use the money. And so I think what we're thinking about in reconstituting this idea is really limiting and focusing those resources on the neighborhoods that have been historically disadvantaged. That a small amount of money that could be dedicated to that community is going to have a much greater impact than if it was sort of spent somewhere out in the hinterlands. And then really having the community drive how that grant money would be spent. And it could be not just as it was identified in the past as sort of physical improvements. I think the city at the time was really concerned with we have to have sort of something to show for it. It has to be tangible. So there were a lot of sort of limitations on some of that, but the neighborhood may want to do some of what we've talked about with some of the other chapters, things like programming or things like other types of ideas that may not necessarily mean that we're going to put a sign in the ground or that we're going to plant, X amount of trees. Some neighborhoods are going to want that. Some neighborhoods may be thinking a little bit more creatively. So we wanted to bring this idea back because we really, really do think it has a lot of merit, and it's really worth floating up with this comprehensive plan. So that's the first idea. I guess we'll move on to the next. So this is something that Laura and I have spent a lot of time sort of thinking through, is like, how do we align the comprehensive plan, the strategic plan, and the budget, as well as other sort of decision-making processes in a way that feels organic, makes sense. There are some things that are best that the strategic plan is going to do better. There are some things that belong in the comprehensive plan. One of the things that we've talked about with this plan is making sure that it remains relevant to the entire city, not just the city organization, but also our neighbors. And part of that is the need to identify when the plan needs to be updated, when we bring in new ideas. What we don't want to do is sort of set it and forget it, set the plan, and then, this commission or future commissions are going to essentially sort of come into this plan that they had no sort of real stake in. And I think that's where we've ended up with these policies that we have had historically in the plan that a current commission sort of feels very divorced from. They're like, well, that's not my policy. That's not my, area of interest. So part of this idea is really creating a much more sort of focused and regimented way to keep the plan updated and keep it in alignment with some of the other planning efforts that are going on. And I think as the commission has really worked on tying these sort of long-term planning ideas and goals with your budgeting process and making sure that we're putting resources to things that we're identifying as priorities. And then the last idea is creating or utilizing an equity assessment tool to guide both things like city budgeting decisions, to making sure that we have a formal process about when the tool will be used and how it'll affect things like budget allocations, but also outside of just budgeting, when the city may be, like, for instance, exploring, okay, we're going to do a big sort of area-wide rezoning, for instance, making sure that we are properly utilizing an equity lens before we get down the line and start changing land use and zoning, to make sure that we understand what the impacts will be on marginalized or other communities that may not have the resources or not have the wherewithal to fully sort of have their voice at the table. So those are the sort of three big ideas that have begun to emerge from the Our Democracy chapter, and I can answer any questions or help you kind of talk through some of these.
All right, thanks, Andrew. I think these are great improvements. I just, when we talk about meaningful neighbor access, and really giving people agency over, how the decisions that are made affect them in their, little square block of the city. If we can figure out how to do this right, I am confident it will be replicated across the state and nation, because cities across the country are, wrestling with how to do this well, not just say they're doing it, but have it be effective in the decision-making process. So I see the potential in this. I think it's going to be about execution. If we embed this in the comp plan, which I guess is true of all of these, but this one especially, because it's talking about how we connect our neighbors to the cogs of government. But I really am excited about both those ideas. Commissioner Ward?
Mr. Mayor, Andrew, thank you for including these. And I just want to thank everybody who's been involved with this. And I want to thank you all up here on the dais, because I've talked a lot tonight, and I want you to know how important it is to me to be able to share ideas back and forth with you all. And this is the kind of stuff that drives me and makes me enjoy this work. Just the ability to put ideas out and have discussions with each other about how we can make this a better place to live for the people that live here. So thank you all.
All right, thank you. Ms. Furusawa or Gabby, I think back to you.
Wonderful. That was mostly it for, that was the bulk of our ideas. We just wanted to share in terms of next steps and what's coming up. Thank you again for all of your very helpful comments, and we're nodding and jotting notes down. So we'll take all of these. And our next touch point with you is once we have created draft language for each of the chapters. We anticipate this will be sometime in June, mid to late June. So thank you again, and we'll come back with good drafts. So, thank you all.
All right, yeah, so mid-June's like 2 weeks away, so I'm guessing probably a little longer than that, but we're excited to see that first draft language. Commissioner Santos?
Thank you, Mayor. Just to clarify, so you're going to come back with draft language for all of them at once, not like separate, is that correct?
Yeah, we're working on all of the chapters at once.
Okay.
And I think as Lydia and Ari I think alluded to in the beginning, like these are some of the ideas that sort of don't exist today, but there are a whole lot of other strategies that we've identified that we're not, that are not here. And those are some of the things that will also be part of the drafts as we go forward. What I think you're asking about is sort of more of the sort of formal process when we're actually going and taking these through for review before we get ready to transmit to the state. And that'll be, I think, if the commission wants us to take it sort of chapter to chapter, we could do that. If we want to bring it all at once, then just have a series of hearings or discussions about like sort of all the language. We could do that as well. It's really kind of what the commission would like to do from a sort of working standpoint.
Okay, we'll have a discussion as a full commission about how we want to do that, maybe at a general policy committee meeting, just an informal discussion about how to bring this back. Because on the one hand, I think trying to meaningfully address each one of those chapters in one meeting is a mental and emotional stretch. But also scheduling a bunch of meetings isn't a mental and emotional stretch. So we'll try to figure out the balance there so we can put out a good product that we'll all be able to support.
And
so
we wanted to, sorry, Mr. Mayor. But we wanted to make sure that you had at least a complete draft because of the interconnectedness of all of these chapters, so that we're not sort of taking a chapter in isolation to you and you're like, well, what about this? Well, what about that? And we're like, that's in the next chapter. That's in the next chapter. We wanted to deliver a draft, a whole draft, and then we can take it sort of chapter by chapter, but we wanted to make sure you could see all those connections and where things were.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think we all are looking forward to looking at that in totality, and then we'll figure out next steps from there. Lydia, Ari, thank you so much. It's always such a pleasure to have you. I know that you're working tirelessly sort of behind the scenes with all our staff, so thank you to everyone in the organization that's been working so hard on this. I can very much see the creativity and, dare I say, pride that you have put into bringing forward these suggestions to us. I hope that you received our input as constructive. I am sensing overall excitement and support for the direction we're headed. But you know, this is a once in a decade opportunity, and so we're all taking it very seriously as well. I want to make sure that it really represents, you know, where we're headed over the next 10 years. So hopefully that's the spirit in which you all heard it, and we'll digest it. And if anybody has any follow-up, you know, I'm of course always open to that conversation. Let's just see if there's anybody from the public that wanted to speak. There's no motions or anything, but I wanted to make sure we gave that opportunity. Madam Clerk, is there anybody waiting on the phone lines?
I don't believe we have members of the public waiting to speak on the Zoom line, but we do have Bethany here. You may have a caller on.
Okay, great. Bethany, you got anybody with you? And good evening,
Thanks,
by the
Mr.
way,
Mayor.
Bethany.
Good evening to you as well. We do have Nathan Scott on the line. Mr. Scott, if you're with us, you may go ahead.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Nathan Scott. So yes, I have some concerns with what was presented. It would have been probably better to take the comment on individual items. So much was discussed, but generally speaking, I'm not in favor of ongoing expansion of city government. I think that was mentioned in education, creating a whole new department with FTEs, and thankfully there seemed to be some resistance from the commissioners, because my first question would be, how are you going to plan on paying for all that continued expansion of city government? It's not the role of education for the city to be involved in education. We have a school board for that, and I think that they are doing an admirable job without city interference and intervention into their lane, if you will. Secondly, you asked what you could do for education. Well, cut GRU electric rates. Every dollar you increase the school board's electric rates is $1 less for education. What can you do for those least vulnerable, those most vulnerable? Lower our GRU electric rates, commissioners. You refuse to do that. You make excuses. You create subsidy after taxpayer-funded subsidy to offset your failed policies, instead of admitting that you're wrong and trying to take corrective action, protect the financial health of GRU customers and taxpayers in the city of Gainesville. You talk about all your wish list projects that you want approved. Well, you know, who approves those projects, commissioners? I think that so you guys are so lost in virtue signaling and focused on defiance that you should really look in the mirror and ask yourself, on one hand, you're acting, and another, you're punching people in the nose. So again, I think you know, the county's smart enough to get that. We're back to business as usual. But the city commission, for whatever reason, you're crusaders till the very end and falling on your sword. And let me know how that works out for you guys. Because you talk about once in a decade opportunity. Maripo, we've had 5 GRU debt downgrades in less than a decade. But you don't seem to be concerned about the financial harm that you and the Gainesville City Commission have brought to the school board, those least able to afford it. I mean, $32 million for the last, how great. That's in solar feed-in tariffs. Now we're up to like 60 million total, the financial harm you've cost us. So I think the priorities are misguided. This isn't utopia. And I think we need to get back to basics, commissioners. And then we might have some money once we fix the problems to do some of this visionary work that you guys want to accomplish. But again, I just, it's hard to be sympathetic when your priorities are so misguided. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Bethany, any other callers?
No, Mayor Poe, no additional callers at this time.
Okay, thank you everyone for the effort tonight. Really appreciate it. No further business before us. We are adjourned.